Professor Velathri had taught xenobiology at the Conclave Institute for 31 years. She had lectured on pressure worlds and frozen moons, on toxic atmospheres and radiation-soaked surfaces. She had shown her students the volcanic fields of Dracuum and the acid oceans of Tesavon Prime, and not once had she seen a student go pale during a lecture. That changed the morning she pulled up Earth. The classroom held 42 students from 19 different species. Young minds from civilizations that had been spacefaring for centuries, beings who believed, with the comfortable confidence of the sheltered, that they had already seen the worst the universe had to offer. Professor Velathri dimmed the lights, brought up the holographic globe, blue and green and heartbreakingly beautiful, and said simply, "This is where humans come from." Then she began to explain what that meant. She started with the atmosphere. 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and that oxygen content, she told them, was not a comfort but a warning. Oxygen at that concentration was a fuel accelerant. It meant that fire on Earth was not a rare catastrophe but a constant, living presence, a force that could erupt from a single spark and consume entire landscapes in hours. Several students shifted in their seats. She moved on to the pressure. 1 full atmosphere at sea level, a crushing weight that would rupture the bodies of 3 species in that very classroom within seconds of unprotected exposure. Then she mentioned the gravity, 9.8 meters per second squared, strong enough that falling from even modest heights onto Earth's extraordinarily hard silicate surface was frequently fatal. A student in the 3rd row, a Solhari, whose homeworld had gravity 1/3 of Earth's, quietly did the calculation and stopped taking notes. She had not yet mentioned the life. She had not yet mentioned what shared the planet with the humans. She had not yet explained that every ecosystem on Earth was, by the standards of every other inhabited world in the conclave, an active war zone, a relentless, planet-wide competition for survival that had been running without pause for 3.5 billion years. She had not yet told them that the humans had not been given a gentle cradle to evolve in. They had been given an arena. And they had not merely survived it. They had risen to the top of it, looked around at everything that had been trying to kill them since the first moment of their existence, and decided, with a creativity and a stubbornness that defied every model of rational species development, to domesticate it, catalog it, protect it, and call it home. The classroom was very quiet. Outside the viewport, the stars looked different than they had an hour ago. Softer, safer, less impressive. The student who asked the first question was a young Dravaki named Sorath, known in the program for his composure. He raised a secondary limb and said, carefully, "Professor, how large are Earth's apex predators?" Velathri brought up the first image. The holographic lion materialized above the central display, golden, muscled, built with an anatomical efficiency that made several students lean forward, and she listed its specifications with clinical precision. Sprint speed exceeding 80 kilometers per hour. Jaws capable of crushing bone. Ambush predator with night vision adapted for darkness. Sora studied it for a long moment and said, "And humans coexist with these?" Velathri corrected him gently. "Humans," she said, "also hunted these. For sport." The classroom made a sound that had no single name across 19 languages, but all meant the same thing. That cannot be right. She showed them the rest. The great white shark. An apex ocean predator unchanged by evolution for millions of years, because evolution had found nothing to improve. The saltwater crocodile, a living fossil whose lineage had outlasted the dinosaurs, capable of explosive predatory strikes and armored in natural plating that made conventional weapons ineffective. She showed them the hippopotamus. Enormous, territorial, responsible for more human fatalities on the African continent than almost any other large animal, despite appearing, at first holographic glance, almost comically docile. She watched her students' body language shift and tighten with each new image. Then she moved to what she privately considered the most important section of the lecture, because it was the section that students always underestimated. She moved to the small things. She brought up the microbial history of Earth, and the classroom, which had just absorbed lions and crocodiles with shaken but functional composure, began to genuinely struggle. Viruses that had killed hundreds of millions. Bacteria that could defeat the immune systems of organisms far more chemically sophisticated than the humans themselves. Parasites of extraordinary complexity that had co-evolved with human biology for so long that they had learned to manipulate neurological function, alter behavior, suppress immune response, and survive every attempt at eradication with an adaptability that bordered on intelligence. And through all of it, through every plague and pandemic and parasitic assault that a living planet could generate over billions of years, the humans had not developed invulnerable biology. They had developed something more unsettling. They had developed medicine. They had looked at the invisible war being waged inside their own bodies, mapped it with obsessive precision, and begun fighting back. Not with evolution. With knowledge. With intention. With the specific, burning refusal to accept that anything in the universe had the right to kill them unchallenged. By the third hour of the lecture, 2 students had requested a brief recess, and 1 had quietly contacted their academic counselor. Professor Velathery granted the recess, poured herself a drink, and waited. When they returned, she continued without ceremony, because the story of Earth did not pause for comfort, and she felt it was important that the learning reflect that truth. She moved to climate. Earth's climate, she explained, was not stable, had never been stable. Had cycled through ice ages and warming periods and mass extinction events with a geological indifference to whatever happened to be living on its surface at the time. The humans had evolved during one of these cycles, emerging as a species during a period of dramatic climate volatility that had driven many of their evolutionary predecessors to extinction. They had survived not because they were the strongest candidate, but because they were the most adaptable. Because somewhere in the architecture of human cognition was a capacity for behavioral flexibility that had no real parallel in the conclave's biological records. They could learn faster than they could evolve. This was the thing that the early conclave xenobiologists had identified and not fully understood. Most species adapted to their environment over thousands of generations. Humans adapted to their environment within a single lifetime, within a single generation, sometimes within a single year. When the ice came, they made fire and clothing and shelter. When the predators came, they made weapons. When the diseases came, they made medicine. When the distance came, when the vast, indifferent, lethal geography of their own planet threatened to separate them into isolated groups too small to survive, they made language complex enough to preserve knowledge across generations and culture durable enough to carry it across continents. They were not the fastest or the strongest or the most physically resilient species Earth had ever produced. They were simply the ones who refused to stop solving the problem. A student named Ives, from the Meridian clans, raised her observation filament slowly. "Professor," she said, "you described Earth's history as a series of extinction-level pressures." "Yes," said Velathery. "And humans survived all of them?" "They did." Ives was quiet for a moment. "Then the humans who exist today, every one of them, is descended from an unbroken line of survivors stretching back to the beginning of complex life on their planet." Velathery looked at her student with the particular satisfaction of a teacher watching comprehension arrive in real time. "Every single one," she confirmed. "The classroom processed this. They were not just looking at a species anymore. They were looking at the end product of 3 1.5 billion years of selection pressure on the most actively lethal planet in the cataloged galaxy. A living monument to survival, walking around in soft tissue and wearing clothes, drinking heated beverages and writing poetry. The fourth section of the lecture was the one Professor Velathery had been both anticipating and dreading, because it was the section that required her students to hold two contradictory truths simultaneously and find a way to reconcile them. She brought up human history, not the biology, not the ecology, but the civilization. And she showed them what a species forged in an unrelenting death world had done with its intelligence once the most immediate survival pressures began to ease. They had not rested. They had not declared the work done and settled into comfortable stasis. They had turned the same restless, problem-solving, boundary-refusing energy that had carried them through ice ages and pandemics toward every other challenge they could identify. And they had produced, in what was by galactic standards an extraordinarily short span of time, art and mathematics and philosophy and architecture and music of a complexity and emotional depth that had startled every conclave cultural analyst assigned to study them. The student Soreth, who had gone quiet after the lion image and stayed quiet for most of 3 hours, spoke again. "How do they carry it?" he asked. Velathery looked at him. "The knowledge," he clarified. "Every human alive knows what their planet is. They know what their history is. They know they are descended from creatures who survived things that should have been unsurvivable. How do they carry that and still?" He gestured at the screen, which currently showed a holographic image of a human child laughing in a field of flowers on Earth's surface. Do that? It was the best question anyone had ever asked in 31 years of teaching. Velathery was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Because they also know that the field is real, that the child is real, that the beauty is not diminished by the danger that surrounds it, it is made more precious by it. Humans do not experience safety the way we do. They experience it as a gift, as something earned, and they celebrate it with everything they have." She showed them the festivals, and the music, and the architecture. She showed them the libraries, physical repositories of preserved knowledge that humans had maintained across thousands of years of civilizational disruption, because they understood at a cellular level what it meant to lose accumulated wisdom. She showed them the hospitals, enormous and complex and in a state of perpetual innovation, because humans had never made peace with preventable death, had never accepted it as a feature of existence rather than a problem awaiting a solution. She showed them the space programs, the early ones, the ones built with chemical rockets and slide rules and extraordinary courage, launched by beings who had only just stopped fighting each other long enough to look up. Every student in that classroom was from a civilization that had received spaceflight technology from a more advanced neighbor. Humans had built it themselves, from scratch, on a death world, while still arguing about politics. The room was completely silent. Professor Velathery ended the lecture the way she always ended it, not with data, but with a story. It was a small story, by the standards of human history. During one of Earth's most catastrophic pandemics, a viral event that had swept the planet in the early 21st century, killing millions and disrupting global civilization for years, a group of human scientists had worked without pause to develop a medical countermeasure. They had worked in the knowledge that their own species, given sufficient time and resources, could solve the problem. They had worked in the specific, characteristically human conviction that the universe did not get to win this one either. They had produced a viable solution in less than a year, a timeline that represented, by every metric of biomedical engineering, an achievement that should have been impossible. And when they were done, the first thing they had done was share it. Not sell it. Not leverage it. Share it, as widely and as rapidly as they could, with every corner of their still recovering world. Deathworld, Delathri said, letting the words sit in the air of the quiet classroom. Every species in the conclave uses this term. It appears in navigational records, in threat assessments, in the earliest xenobiological surveys of the Sol system. Earth is classified as a death world, and the classification is technically accurate. The atmospheric, gravitational, biological, and climatic conditions of that planet are objectively lethal to the majority of known species. She paused. But I want you to understand something that the classification does not capture. The word death world was coined by surveyors who looked at Earth's conditions and calculated survival probability for standard conclave biology. They were right about the planet. They were measuring the wrong species. She brought up one final image, not a predator, not a weapon, not a fleet or a historical monument. Just a human face. Older, lined, eyes carrying the particular quality that humans developed when they had survived enough to know its value. Looking directly into the recorder with an expression of calm, complete, undefeated presence. Earth is a death world, she said, and the humans who come from it are not survivors of it. They are its product. Every instinct, every reflex, every cultural value they carry, the protectiveness, the stubbornness, the refusal to leave anyone behind, the compulsion to solve problems rather than accept them, the love of beauty that burns all the brighter because they know how quickly it can be taken. All of it was shaped by a planet that spent billions of years trying to produce something extraordinary. She closed the holographic display. The stars outside the viewport were the same as they had been 8 hours ago. The students were not. When you meet a human, she said, and you will meet them, remember what made them. Remember what they walked out of. And understand that when they smile at you, when they offer you friendship or protection or help, they are giving you something their entire evolutionary history taught them was precious beyond measure. She gathered her materials. They are giving you safety. And they know, better than any species alive, exactly what that costs. The classroom remained still long after she left. 42 students from 19 civilizations, sitting in silence, looking at the place where the image of that human face had been. Outside, somewhere in the corridors of the institute, a human exchange student was laughing at something, a bright, unguarded sound that bounced off the walls and drifted through the closed door. Not one student in that room heard it the same way they would have heard it that morning. Not one of them ever would again.